So the first album we've got here is Doggerland by Rudi Zygadlo, which came out on the 30th of June 2023. Do you want to take this one, Grant?
Yeah, I probably can't pronounce his the second name there, so I'm just going to refer to him as Rudi.
Okay.
So as you said, it was released on the 30th of June on his own record label, I believe, RZ. Contains 14 songs and is approximately 43 minutes and 17 seconds long. He is a self-described multi-instrumentalist, producer and mystic tour guide. This is his third studio album to date, which he has described as a bubble of hope in a sea of doom, saluting the oncoming tides with big hooks and a wry sense of humour, drawing on reference points that span Greek mythology, Aldous Huxley, Stevie Smith's poems, and the everyday bathos of modern urban life. I don't know all that much of his kind of back catalogue. I did have a kind of brief look over it. I do feel as if this is kind of slightly different. The songs that I listened to did have a bit of a kind of electro kind of feel to it, kind of reminiscent of PNAU, Empire of the Sun, Passion Pit type of feel to it. But with this track, you know what I mean? Not that I dislike that stuff, but with this album, you know, I immediately kind of fell in love with it. I've kind of written down here that I think it's fun, funky, and full of unbridled genius, reminiscent of Frank Zappa in terms of its depth, breadth, innovativeness, and imagination. Yeah, I absolutely adored this album. Immediately kind of struck by how he looks as well, which I thought was quite interesting. That kind of like bobbed haircut and like drawn on moustache, which I think, I don't know where that comes from, because, you know, for my money it was kind of reminiscent of Foxy Shazam's Eric Nally. Do you know who I'm talking about? He featured on trying to remember the name of the guy now. He was like a kind of guest vocalist on the guy that sang Thrift Store. What song I'm on about? Doesn't matter. He's got that kind of same moustache and same kind of hairdo, and I wonder if it's like, I don't know if it's derived from something else. I really don't know. It doesn't matter. But yeah, absolutely loved this album. The first two opening tracks, Thriving, Not Diving, and Somewhere in Glasgow, are an absolute delight to listen to. Somewhere in Glasgow in particular is full of little interesting hooks and nuances from the way he uses his voice, which for my money at times sounded kind of reminiscent of Modest Mouse vocalist Isaac Brock. And I think it's, you know, the way he kind of pronounces certain words or puts interesting inflections onto kind of place names like Finiston or Mary Hill. I remember having this conversation with you on Mustagdu, like in Siberia, we were fucking smoking a fag or whatever, talking about it. And, you know, like in this song in particular, there's a kind of like theremin-esque electronic which he uses to kind of, which I've written here, kind of is used to kind of catch the very essence of, you know, he describes swallows in the garden. That's a kind of lyric within the song, and then that's followed up by these, I think it is the use of a kind of theremin or an electronic whatever, and it just sounds almost like onomatopoeic, like almost like reminiscent of two swallows kind of like just diving about in the garden.
It reminded me of a bit of the Eel song, My Beloved Monster, you know, from Shrek. Yeah. Just that sort of weird, it's kind of balloon animals or something that comes in the film, but it's, yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, this is like it's almost like a guitar that sounds like a theremin or something like that. I know it's
maybe
it's
a bit of a slide guitar or something.
Yeah, Somewhere in Glasgow, it's a fucking anthem. I mean, like that chorus, you know, where he sings Somewhere in Glasgow, like that should be a fucking anthem for Glasgow. It's just like, you know, everybody. You know, it's one of those songs people just need to hear, I think. So catchy. And I had a little bit of background with Rudi Zygadlo in that I reviewed his Chattanooga EP, which came out a couple of years ago. And other than that, I haven't heard anything more, but the Chattanooga EP, 4 of the songs from that are on this album. So it's nice to get a chance to talk about some of those tracks again. But so those 4 tracks were Chattanooga, obviously the title track from that EP, Transport, Sellotape, and Athens, Love Boat. So those were the songs that I'd already heard just from reviewing that EP. I hadn't really dug back into his back catalogue or anything before that. So and the Chattanooga EP, it's there's 4 songs of it on here, so it's quite similar to the sort of thing that's on this album. So it's kind of more of what I was expecting from Rudi Zygadlo, really. Really good opening track, Thriving Not Driving, reminded me sort of that, remember the Voids album that I made you and the Waco Boys listen to? It's got kind of that weirdo electro-pop kind of, it's like a mixture of electro-pop and classic rock, and it's just sort of a weird collection of noises that all work together. I think there's a bit of the Voids, that Voids album in particular anyway, throughout the rest of the album as well. Somewhere in Glasgow we've talked about, but it's got just weird catchy electronics, distorted riffs, clanging, bending, picking, slick little guitar licks. Sounds like the Eels, but also sounds like Queen. I think there's bits of Queen here and there, and that sort of classic rock elsewhere on the album.
Yeah.
The third track is A Bridge of Sighs, is just, it's just a interlude really, but it's just a quick bit of poetry, a bit of performance art that weeds into the next track. I don't pretend to understand what he's going on about. He talks about holding a palace in one hand, a prison in the other, and they ask for some soap and some hemlock. This is...
And take me to the stage, isn't it? Is that what he says?
Possibly. So, I think there's a lot in here that I do not understand.
I like
it. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
I like that. I wonder if, I suppose the look, it's not a case of wondering, it will be a kind of performance piece, that look, that persona that he kind of takes on is kind of part of a kind of performance piece. Yeah, as you said, kind of Bridge of Sighs, kind of short pieces, kind of spoken word poetry, the kind of soundscape that accompanies it kind of felt reminiscent of kind of Patrick Pearson's soundscapes off the LYR Calling the Crash Team album. So yeah, that was right up my street. It is very short though, but then that acts as a bit of a kind of segue into Helmet On, which, in keeping with what you were kind of saying, you were kind of saying that there's elements of kind of classic rock in there. I thought this song, the vocals in this song in particular, almost had a kind of Bowie-esque kind of feel to it, particularly that kind of vocal refrain of Wella, 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 which he kind of sings at one point in the song. Not sure if it's intentional, but there was a bit where he's singing I can make you, and it's talking about almost having this kind of magic helmet. It's about kind of I can't see you, or you can disappear when I put this helmet on. And when he repeats that I can make it, for me it kind of ties back into what I was kind of saying earlier on about how he uses his voice. His voice is very much, part of the instrumentation in a lot of his songs. And for me, that almost sounds like he was kind of saying alchemy, which I don't know if is kind of keeping with, this idea of kind of magic and all the rest of it. I know that probably sounds a bit silly, but that's how it kind of came across to me.
Yeah, the guitar riff on that is super 80s, in a really good way, really chunky. And I thought some of the vocals sounded a bit like Rick Astley.
Okay.
In that sort of 80s kind of poppy kind of way. I thought there were bits that sounded kind of like MGMT as well.
Yeah.
And just a really nice, kind of awkward guitar solo in the middle of the song that sounds like it could be improvised. But yeah, it's a really interesting song, and that 80s guitar riff is just brilliant.
There's other songs where he kind of takes on a bit of an old man crooning type voice. I think it's on there. Is it Come On Through? It's like, come on through, dear boy, dear boy.
Well, I think that's one where I mentioned David Bowie, as I said. Yeah, I thought he had these sort of commanding vocals that sounded a bit like David Bowie, occasionally like Nick Cave, that kind of deeper commanding voice that Nick Cave has.
It's funny you mention Nick Cave, because there's a couple of tracks towards the end of the album where I've been like, yeah, that sounds pretty similar to Nick Cave, kind of, for my money, kind of reminiscent of the Ghosteen album that we covered before, which obviously loved. Mentioned Sellotape here as well, so I think it was one of the singles that was kind of released from the album. The opening bars reminded me a bit of a kind of Smashing Pumpkins song, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I think it was either kind of Avador or something off the kind of Melancholy and Infinite Sadness album. It's another absolute banger, kind of full of kind of shredding guitar, weird kind of electronics, but weird bit of kind of interesting electronics, and a lot of kind of tongue-in-cheek humour, which is kind of peppered throughout the course of the album. So yeah, I think all the tracks are fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we jumped over a couple of tracks there that are, they're all worth mentioning. Transport, that's the first one that we hear from the Chattanooga EP. And I've said, it sounds a bit like something a late 90s boy band would have done. Like, I've written there's bits of the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and then, like, some of the vocals sound a bit like Justin Timberlake. And I think bits of it sound like a Payphone by Maroon 5 as well. Which just made me laugh because, I don't know, Maroon 5 makes me laugh nowadays for some reason.
Yeah, but I suppose that's again kind of back to what we were kind of saying about the kind of innovativeness and the breadth of this. So, like, on one hand, we were kind of talking about how, his vocals sound a bit like Nick Cave, it sounds a bit like, David Bowie, and then you're mentioning kind of 90s boy bands,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I'm throwing in Justin Timberlake, Rick Astley, like, just all sorts. There's obviously another interlude track 8, which is This Is Doggerland, which is really memorable, even though it's an interlude. It's almost like a game show the way it's set up for me. It's like there's like the intro to the game show, which has got the sort of This Is Doggerland fanfare before the host comes on and sort of explains what point we've got to in the album. He's like, all right, I think we're halfway through this ripping yarn, and he it's the way he rolls the R. I'm not going to attempt to roll it like he does, but
you're right, because you could almost imagine it like appearing on the screen when he kind of mentions all these things, can't you?
Yeah, because he mentions a list of stuff which include megafauna, VR escapism, dating apps, train crashes, ginger nuts, and Fred Astaire. And then he lists a few more things. And then, like you say, there's this sound that's almost like, a question is being lit up on the board in a game show.
Like Family Fortunes or something.
Yeah, exactly. I just like the staging of it and the fact that it's funny as well. Just that sort of flamboyant way it's delivered.
Yeah. Wonder if there's something to do with, like, if there's a connection between Doggerland and Megafauna. Because do you know what Doggerland is, or what it was? It was the land bridge that connected Britain with the rest of Europe, I think.
Oh, okay.
Who knows? Probably just went straight over my head.
Well, I think it's stuff like that is like, I'm just like, fuck, I really don't know anything. You start mentioning things like this, like, I genuinely know nothing. I just enjoy this album a lot, regardless of I understand what he's on about or not. And there's a lot going on over 14 tracks. The song I really wanted to talk about was Chattanooga, which is the title track from the EP, which when I first heard that EP, I absolutely rinsed that song to death, and I just love it. The rhythm of the guitars, the vocals are great. There's this sort of effortless slacker vibe. There's bits of Prince and Depeche Mode in it, but it's the Sean Connery impression that makes it for me every time, where he's just like, he's exactly. He sings a Chattanooga, a Steely Dandy, and there's something about that. It's just pure dopamine. I don't know. Every time I just listen out in anticipation for it. I absolutely love that song.
I think one of my favourite tracks from the album, and this is kind of back to what I was saying about kind of Nick Cave and Ghosteen album, was the last track in the album, Under the Water Mother. I just thought it was probably one of the most kind of emotive numbers of the collection. Fell in love with that kind of gang vocal refrain of Give Us a Revelation. I just absolutely loved it. I've rinsed that one big time. Yeah.
You know what that reminded me of, that song?
What?
Futurama. So there's an episode of Futurama where Fry makes a deal with the devil, and he gets the devil's like robot hands, so he can learn to play
violin.
No, it's a futuristic thing called, is it the holophone? And basically he does it to try and impress Leela. He becomes the like greatest holophone player that's ever lived, and then he has to give his real hands back. He has to get his real hands back to save Leela's life, or no, to stop her from marrying the devil or some shit like that. And it's just like the end of that where Fry's got his old hands back and he's shit at the holophone, but it's like really emotional because of everything that's happened before it. Futurama's a weird show in that it can be extremely emotional, like even though it's a comedy show, it has some storylines that are really like heart-wrenching, and that song reminded me of that. Through the middle part of the song anyway, it's got that sort of distorted melody.
Yeah, there's a cracking guitar solo on as well, just this kind of big swelling guitar solo it's pretty powerful stuff. Yeah,
this is a good song, and yeah, it starts off a bit like Unchained Melody, but then kind of goes on to do its own kind of thing. So yeah, I suppose that's a way of describing the albums. There's lots of kind of familiarities that then sort of go off in really quite surprising ways.
Aye, there is. We've mentioned a few, obviously Nick Cave, David Bowie. I've mentioned,
can't forget NSYNC,
kind of bit of alt rock in there. I can mention kind of Modest Mouse. So as well as kind of drawing on a lot of different kind of themes and what have you, obviously drawn from quite a number of kind of influences, and it really is a pretty amazing album, to be honest. This is the album that I came back to the most and have done since we first started kind of talking about doing this podcast, doing this episode.
Cool. Okay, well, I'll give you my score then. So I've given it a 9 out of 10. I think it's really solid. There's a few songs, or maybe just one or two songs where I'm not quite as taken with them, but overall I think it's superb.
I give it a 10 out of 10. And I would agree. I would have to agree. I know, like, when we're kind of talking about our ratings, it should be kind of flawless. I think that's the definition for giving somebody a 10 out of 10.
I think it's nearly or almost flawless. So it's not. So it doesn't have to be like absolutely perfect to get a 10, which sounds stupid, but I think that's.
I know what you mean. I think like there are a couple of tracks maybe aren't as good as the others, but I think the songs that are good are so good it kind of makes up for that, if that makes sense. So yes, a 10 out of 10 for me.
Nice. Okay, well, it's going to go into the Hall of Fame.
Bam.
Which still don't have a buzzer or any kind of fanfare for that.
Nothing. Absolutely
nothing. So that all you get is a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. 2 thumbs up.
Great. Okay, so that was Doggerland by Rudi Zygadlo.
Chattanooga, a Steely Dandy. It's not finished. It's finished.